Welcome everyone to the Delphi Economic Forum. Today's discussion focuses on a critical issue for both Greece and the European Union: external challenges in the Eastern Mediterranean, immigration, security, and of course the region's future. We're fortunate to have distinguished guests and speakers with us. Mr. Dimitris Αβραμόπουλος, member of the Greek Parliament, former EU Commissioner for Migration, Home Affairs and Citizenship, 2014 to 19, 5 years. He brings his invaluable experience in leading the EU's response to migration challenges. Her Excellency Laurence Oer, Ambassador of France in Greece, will offer insight, of course, into the French perspective on EU's Eastern Mediterranean strategy. Dr. Othon Anastasakis, Director of the European Studies Centre, St. Antony's College in the University of Oxford in the UK. He will provide academic expertise on regional security dynamics. And last but not least, Mr. Konstantinos Philis, Director of Institute of Global Affairs and Professor to the American College of Greece. Of course, Greece, geographically located at the crossroads of Europe, Asia, and Africa, bears the burden of migratory flows and plays a crucial role in the EU's border security. The Eastern Mediterranean region itself is experiencing complex security challenges, and all these further amplify the critical issues in the region. Let's open the floor for a discussion on how Greece and the EU can navigate external challenges and ensure a more stable Eastern Mediterranean region. I will start with Mr. Αβραμόπουλος. Considering your experience as an EU Commissioner for Migration, how has the EU's approach to migration and asylum changed since 2015 and the refugee crisis that we had those days?
Mr. Danez, you touched a very sensitive point, because when I was designated European Commissioner for Migration and Security, I could never imagine that in 5 months' time it would be the main topic on a global scale, because migration and security were mixed up. We had the very first terrorist attacks in the year 2015, and the very first uncontrolled migratory flows, especially from Eastern Mediterranean. So, Juncker called me and said, Dimitri, it's your portfolio. I believed at that moment that I was the lucky one to have a smooth portfolio. I could never imagine what would follow up. So we started building from scratch the European migration and security agenda, which was not very easy, I can tell you, because to convince 28 member states to coordinate and agree on a common policy on migration, for me, it was a great experience. Because what's the problem in Europe? In Europe, unfortunately, it's not compared, it cannot compare with the United States. We do not have a federal system. I mean, we do not decide in a way that we can oblige countries and members to respect the final decision, because every country has its own policy on that. And finally, we made it. In the year 2016, we adopted the Common European Agenda on Migration. We all remember what happened at that time. The situation was under control. But let's go to the hottest point of that. Migration was not just a phenomenon of that time. It came here to last. The moment we are here in Delphi, it's good to know that more than 400 million people around the world are on the move. So it has become a global issue. I remember I had proposed to the Secretary General of the United Nations to convene an extraordinary assembly of the United Nations to discuss the issue, the global base. Well, a lot of rhetorics, a lot of nice words, but at the end, the decision that was made was not implemented. We are confronted with huge challenges. And then we had the security issues. And some believed that security was linked to migration. Just for you to know, all these, the perpetrators of the terrorist acts in Europe were not migrants. They were homegrown citizens in countries like, the ambassador knows that very well, in the attack on Bataclan and in other parts of Europe. So we had to cope cope with a very complex situation. The migration is here. It will be for the next decades. So are we prepared for that? Is Europe prepared? Is the whole world prepared? I'm not sure. And the last pact that was agreed the other day by the European Parliament, of course it has to be approved by the European Council. I am not sure that it will succeed. I'm not sure it will succeed because it brings Dublin from the back door. This is my question, having lived this, having experienced migration in the beginning of this crisis. But on the other hand, we need migration. We need to open legal ways for all those who want to come to Europe. What is happening exactly? All these desperate people, they want to come to Europe because Europe is a safe destination. What is behind that? What are the root causes of migration? Dictatorships, civil wars, climate change. They all want to move to a safer harbor. And Europe is, even today, the safest place to go. Within Europe, we had two destinations, Germany and Sweden. This is how it started. But Germany is over-congested now. They cannot stand any more refugees and migrants there. And then we had another problem. Who is refugee and who is migrant? All these hot spots that were set up on the borders of the European Union, they had a very hard work to do because you don't know who is in front of you. And something which is also a problem, I try to sum up on what I have lived. Yeah. Most of the countries where these migrants come from, or refugees, they don't want to take back their citizens, their nationals. They do not recognize them. I was in Pakistan, I met the authorities in Bangladesh. Believe me, it was very, very difficult. But on the other hand, we need migrants because Europe is an aging continent. You know that, compared to Africa. So we need people to work here, but we have to open legal ways. And this is what has been somehow predicted by the new pact. Will it work? I don't know, to be frank with you, because migration is still out of control. Mm-hmm. This is the reality. I want to share with you my experience. And then we have to see how is it linked with security issues.
But is this phenomenon going to intensify? What's
definitely, especially what's happening right now in Middle East and in other parts of the world, it's going to become bigger and bigger in the future. You see what's happening in Ukraine, for instance. More than 4 million refugees have crossed the borders of Ukraine with neighboring countries like Poland and Hungary. There's a difference there. Let me focus on that. You know that populism and nationalism is on the rise in Europe. It is not to laugh with what I'm going to say, but there were some politicians from former Eastern European countries who said, okay, we are ready to accept because they do not agree in sharing the burden in the spirit of responsibility and solidarity. But we want them to be blonde, Christians, which means that there's a sort of racism.
Cherry-picking.
Cherry-picking. So it's not the case. Right now, Europe is under pressure from both sides. From Ukraine, because there are still flows from this country because of what's happening there, and from Middle East, because of what's happening in Gaza and in the other countries of the area. Libya is a big problem for us because it's a failed state, you know that. So it's an open corridor. It's a paradise of smugglers and traffickers. They use the eastern part of Libya under General Haftar. Sorry, I do not nourish great respect for this guy, who has opened the doors for uncontrolled flows towards Italy mostly, and of course Greece. Cyprus is also under pressure right now. So we have to cope in a spirit of responsibility, always respecting the human rights aspect and of course the international humanitarian law. So it is a complex situation. I don't think that we are very well prepared for that. Theoretically we are. Rhetorically we are. But in real terms, it is not easy. L'ambassadrice de France, the ambassador of France will tell us more because France has a great experience on migration, on legal migration of course, but France is one of the destinations of
I
all
would
these
like your
desperate
views on that. Thank you very much. I would like your views on that.
Thank you very much to invite me, first of all, for the Delphi Forum. It's a great honor to be here on my first year of a mandate and to share this panel today. Of course, I share the views with Dimitris about the stake which is going on the migration issues. I was an ambassador of France to Skopje when the big crisis started, and we always thought it not only as a technical problem, migrations, but also a political problem and a foreign affairs problems, because we will see in this current situation that it's at stake. It's divisive in European societies, especially in a year of European elections. It is also something which happens as crisis. We'll probably speak again about Ukraine or Gaza, but it's as a whole, if I take the present situation, a big step to know and to consider that we were able to adopt the Migration Asylum Pact that was approved by Parliament last week. As you know, it was a long way to reinforce the control of external borders of the EU and to settle the whole different elements of the pact. And as a matter of result, I would say that all the principles that we wanted in the pact which are control of the borders, but also solidarity within the different member states and an external policy about what we should do with the countries of origin are in the pact. Of course, it will not be implemented before the European elections. It will take steps to it, but the different aspects of the pact is really a new step, which is very important. From 2026 already, we will have the different aspects of the different regulations we will put into force, and we will see the results. As a French representative to Athens, what I want to say is that you cannot have just a policy and not taking bilateral steps to make it work. A lot of things in the EU work only if you have very strong exchange of good practices, good cooperation on the borders, good cooperation on the technical aspects. I would imagine that we could speak a little bit more about the new steps of the regulation. For instance, the Schengen border regulation, the Schengen aspects of what we are going to improve with digital means, but all that exists between France and Greece. With all the tools and the human capacities that we have, we consider today that it's one of our most important cooperation. I always say security is our most important cooperation between France and Greece. It includes the military, it includes the civilian, and this is migration, one of the important steps. Why do I speak about both of them? Because today it's what we call in the global geographical and geopolitical new context with Ukraine and Gaza, what we call asymmetric threats. It's not only that you have military threat or you have a threat that can happen because of a danger that comes from an attack, as we mentioned, Charlie and terrorist risk that was happening. It can encompass other type of threats which we have to cope globally and together. So that's my first answer. You have to be aware that it's a very good result that you have a new migration and asylum pact. We are relieved that we were able to finish this package of legislation which took us ages. We started in 2018 and 19 and 20, that we have that to be put into force now. But it is true that if you consider all the bilateral tools that we have between France and Greece, we can do much more on steps and giving information and have concrete results to show our citizens that this is an important issue that we can take globally as the EU.
Thank you, Mr. Sasakis. I would like to move on a bit. The European Union has been working on securing agreements with various third-party states to address the migration challenges. Are these agreements effective?
Thank you very much, Mr. Danezis. It's a pleasure to be in this panel, first of all, let me say. But also, if I can just at the general kind of level, I would like to do two things. The first one is to relativize the issue of migration and to say that this is an old kind of process of humanity since the beginning of humanity. So migration, and that's what I always tell my students, it's not a phenomenon of today, and we're not kind of being confronted with a terrible situation now. It's been all across the humanity's history. So in that respect, what we are faced today is the notion of migration in the context of the national state, but also of the European Union. This kind of post-empire, post-colonial kind of context. And that's why it can become exclusionary often, and at the same time it is being securitized, because that securitization is very much about the perceptions of the people and how they understand and perceive this phenomenon as being something which threatens their security. So in that respect, it's something that it's been there all along. The second thing that I would like to do is to de-Europeanize the issue and to say that, yes, we know that Europe and the United States, for that matter, and some other Western countries, including Australia or Canada, they're very attractive destinations for migrants that come from disadvantaged areas around the world. Increasingly, as Mr. Αβραμόπουλος said, because of the scale of the wars that we are seeing right now in the world, we would probably be seeing this even more. Europe, for obvious reasons, is a destination, and in particular, some countries. But I would like to testify here as well that also some countries which are centers of, or transit countries that we consider, and I'm thinking right now of Turkey or Egypt, that has got 9 million in Egypt, we understand, and maybe 3, 4, or 5 in Turkey, they themselves are also destinations of refugees. So it's not that everybody wants to come to Europe, and that is very important for the strategy that the European Union is trying to put forward, because if you perceive the migration issue and all those migrants coming, that they're there in the transit countries waiting for the door to open, or in whatever other way, legal way, to kind of cross the sea and come into Europe, we are not having the full picture, I believe. And that is affecting then the way that the European Union is putting together its framework. As a threat, it may not be doing a very good job, because when, and that has been a very big criticism, because that's the way that then you collaborate with authoritarian rulers, and by collaborating with authoritarian rulers, giving them money to address that phenomenon, which you want in order to protect yourself, you are actually giving them a lot of strength. And that we have seen in Erdogan's case, because of the migration discussion with the European Union, he became quite omnipresent. At various points, he was threatening he would open the doors here or the doors there, but also within his own land, how he would use a migratory issue in order to have, to kind of create reactions. And I am worried a little bit, of course, also what's going to happen with Egypt as well, because we have an authoritarian leadership there as well. And, by giving ammunition to those rulers, of course, the EU has to think of realism as well, but also of the lessons learned from, from Turkey and Tunisia in the way that, and if we consider, that's my final point, those countries as destination as well, then it's a different way that you address your funding to them. And also to put conditionality, because that's something that is completely missing from the European Union right now when it gives that kind of money to those systems.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I see Mr. Fillings is taking notes. He probably wants to elaborate on that.
Actually, I've been covered by the aforementioned speakers. Two things to add on my behalf. First, the demographic shifts and the explosion in Africa. By 2050, Africa's population will double. Nigeria is a case that we should look into in a very detailed way. Nigeria today has a population of 220 million people, and by 2060, it will have a population of 470 million people, being the third most populous country in the world after India and China, surpassing the United States. If we add to this demographic explosion in Africa, but not only Africa, the fact that in Europe we have an aging population. There is no comparison actually between population in Europe and population in Africa. And the fact that we have the climate crisis, for me it's not a climate change anymore, it has turned into a crisis, then we should start preparing for, let's say, legions of migrants in the coming years, especially in the case of Europe. And whether we consider them to be a threat, a security threat, which is not the case, as far as I'm concerned, or a threat to our demographics, or an opportunity, or a challenge, the way we perceive the migration issue, which is a constant phenomenon, as Othonas very correctly, and of course Mr. Αβραμόπουλος pointed out, the way we perceive it will define our policies. And one last point, we have some buffers. As European Union, we have created some buffers. Countries of origin, neighboring countries, and of course, in the case of Greece and Italy, the countries for first reception, or Spain in the past, Cyprus nowadays as we speak. How the money, how the funds that we provide authoritarian leaders in most cases, again as very well said by Othon, how this money is channeled is something that we should take into serious consideration, and I fully agree with the point that Othon has made about conditionality, but again we cannot check how this money is channeled, and this is something really important. And the last point, neighboring countries are also of crucial importance. Why? Because people stay there hoping that something will change and they might get back. As far as nothing changes, they continue their trip ending to Europe.
Definitely a broad subject, lots of issues on the table. You want to add something, Mr. Αβραμόπουλος?
Let me tell you, because we talk about authoritarian regimes, Egypt and Turkey, there's a big difference. But anyway, I can tell you that the money never goes to the governments. It goes to NGOs and United Nations. So European Union is not funding the countries. The problem is when some governments in Europe announce that they are not keen anymore to provide with financial support these countries. What will happen? Because regarding Turkey, I can tell you, because I had visited even Gaziantep's camps and all these things, they've done a good job. Because the so-called EU-Turkey statement was very much respected and implemented till 2019. And it's not about 3.5 million refugees. There are 5 million around. In Egypt, as you very correctly said, there are 9 million. Our cooperation with these authoritarian regimes have produced results. And I can tell you something, because I had lived it from the time I was Minister of Foreign Affairs till the period I was Commissioner. If al-Sisi had not intervened by overthrowing the democratically elected Morsi, who was the leader of Muslim Brothers, we would have there a second Libya, which would be a disaster for Europe. So it is good to make a distinction here, whether we have as interlocutors their governments or their regimes. We have to admit, if we really want to conclude an agreement with them, that we have to talk, to discuss with these leaders. And al-Sisi so far is fully respecting what we have decided. Now, regarding migration in general, as I said in the beginning, during my introductory remarks, migration came to stay. As often said very correctly, it's not a new phenomenon. From the very beginning of life on this planet, the populations were on the move. It was always like this. The problem is not that we have organized systems institutionally, so we have to cope with this reality. That's why I said before, we have to open legal ways, because we need migrants in Europe. As you, Konstantinos, said before, Europe is an aging continent. It's not like Africa. You referred to Africa before. Africa is booming. In 10 years, 20 years from now, they will have doubled their population. And more and more waves of migrants would approach the European borders. Is Europe prepared for that? What we have done so far in the year 2015, we managed, as I said in the beginning, to adopt a common agenda on migration. But it's not easy. Now things are changing in Europe. I'll tell you why. Because the more populist and the far right-wing governments are getting power, most xenophobic behaviors will start in all countries, which is to the detriment of this policy. I want to be outspoken because now I can do that. Orban, for instance, Orban is hating migrants. It's incredible what's happening there. They have received some from Ukraine, but regarding what's happening in the area of Mediterranean, they are very reluctant and negative. And they're attacking openly the European migration policy. Let me predict something. Within some days, there will be the Council of Ministers to decide whether they will adopt the proposal of the Parliament. I am sure that Hungary will oppose to that. And this is the problem, because it's not only Hungary, it's the Slovak Republic. You know what's happening there? All these former Eastern European countries, and it is a strange thing for me, they come from an internationalist approach of the world to a harsh, far right-wing stance. And migration is on the top. I remind you that Brexit, if it happened because of migration. All these populists there, they articulate the strong anti-migrants verb in order to convince the society that they have to leave Europe. So it is not an easy issue to cope with. It is linked also with security. We said it before. And there are countries that have suffered from that. But there, since you referred to security, I can tell you, because I was also responsible for that, in the beginning it was difficult to convince 28 member states to cooperate on security issues. To share intelligence is not an easy thing in Europe, because Europe, as I explained in the beginning, is divided on that. All national systems, the so-called deep states, they want to keep the ownership of information and intelligence for them. If there was cooperation between member states, things would be different. Even the terrorist attacks in France and in other parts of Europe would have been predicted and prevented. But it didn't happen. Now they work. Europol is upgraded, is beefed up. It has become a web of information and exchange intelligence and all these things. So now it works. But it is linked to migration. This, for me, is not right. It is an easy way to explain why do we have terrorist problems in Europe. It has to do with other things. It had to do with, for me, a wrong decision in the year 2012 to destabilize the regimes in Northern Africa. We Europeans must understand one thing, that democracy is not exported. You cannot find it in the supermarkets or the shelves and buy it. So we push them, and we managed to destabilize the region. And this is what gave birth to terrorism. And I'm sure that we're going to suffer a lot because of what has happened later on in countries like Afghanistan, like with the Taliban and all these things. So this has not to be mixed up and amalgamated with migration. Migration is a phenomenon, as we said before. We have to cope with that. We need migrants. We have to open legal ways for that. And this is the basic thing upon which all member states should agree. But as I told you, it is difficult because things are changing, governments are changing, and we are in view of big political transformation within the European political system. To be frank, I'm not very optimistic for the future because of what is happening. Sorry, Mrs. Ambassador, I can tell you that I know that you are not involved in politics, but the rise of Mrs. Le Pen in France might be one of the problems of Europe in the future. Sorry.
Mr. Αβραμόπουλος, there's no doubt you are very outspoken. I think we all agree on that. Your Excellency,
Yes.
what are the key priorities for France in promoting stability and security in the region?
Yes, I think as a diplomat, I think it's very important to stress what is the context of the region, Oriental in the Mediterranean, that we have, which has changed dramatically since we have the aggression of Ukraine, the war launched by Russia. We don't only have a migration crisis that could come from countries who are failed states. I mentioned here again Libya, and we could speak about Syria, and we will have to speak about what's happening in Gaza. But definitely what happened in February 2022 changed completely the geostrategic situation towards Turkey, for instance. Turkey today is a country. I was listening to what was said in the Turkish-Greek relationship. If you take the viewpoint of France, the dialogue between the two countries is very positive, because we need we cannot consider that between Turkey and Greece a new period of tension arises. We are neighbors of a war, just 1,000 kilometers from here. So, meaning that, of course, we know that migration is a key element of stability in Oriental Mediterranean, but as a whole, what have been doing the EU and France since 2022 is trying to secure that our principles, our borders, but also the 5 supports to Ukraine is unconditional, goes as long as it takes, involves Greece, and in this context, Aegean waters and the discussion on migration takes place. If you see what we are going to do next week at the European Council, we start again the discussion with a paragraph which has been discussed to know if we start EU-Turkey dialogue. And as you remember, in 2016, it was the key position of the EU to have this agreement. And as a former commissioner, you know by heart that it was key to avoid a much larger humanitarian crisis and the migration crisis. It was to discuss about Turkey. So what am I trying to say here? France's position is strong in Greece because we signed in 2021 a new strategic agreement with a mutual assistance clause, meaning that if anything happens in the neighbor of Delphi, we are committed. It was very important to stress it again today because we have launched initiative together. We launched an initiative with Cyprus, Greece, and France towards humanitarian maritime corridors. That was in October. We also have launched an initiative on the Red Sea. It is an operation that started on the 19th of February on the Red Sea, meaning that little by little we are consolidating a very operational, a very crucial within the bilateral agreement. We consider we have 200 exercises per year. We just had one yesterday, 7 Rafales from France, the Rafales from Greece, and we were able to exchange good practices with the Qatari Rafales, for instance, to secure that whatever the frame is within NATO or EU, between France and Greece, we are able to cope very quickly with any type of crisis. Let me not extend my comments about Ukraine, but everybody has to remind that in the last 2 years, the European Council had dedicated the main elements of its positions to get a consensus on Ukraine, 13 rounds of sanctions, and we managed it. It is a unity, solidarity, whatever we can think about, whatever government is now taking steps for political reasons, we have that. And the same with Gaza. And the last time we met, it was a frank launching of a ceasefire. Just to finish with, what is the role of France? just on the 9th of April, we signed between France, the President Sisi of Egypt, and with the King of Jordan, a new appeal for ceasefire in Gaza. So, meaning that all what the Greek government and the tours that the EU went with Prime Minister Mitsotakis to Egypt is key to the stability we are all aiming at with all our different positions. Greece will join, hopefully, the United Nations Security Council after the elections in June, and we will continue working all together within that direction, going towards peace element and regional stability. And you can count, of course, on France to continue.
We're running out of time, Anna.
Sorry.
Because we just have 5 more minutes for this discussion. The topic is very, very broad, and we can stay here for quite a long. Mr. Anastasakis, I would like to comment the Turkey's foreign policy on the security in the area.
Yes, can I do something before that? Because it's been an interesting migration.
An answer of 2 minutes, that would be great.
It's been an interesting migration discussion, and what I would like also to do here is to maybe suggest whether we can, and because we're also in the business of silver lining in our university, Calypso Nikolaidis is here, and we've been working a lot on seeing the rosy picture as well. You are a person like this, Mr. Αβραμόπουλος. Can we see the migration space in the Eastern Mediterranean as a positive space of communication? Because the big success of the statement between EU and Turkey is that it managed to keep the dialogue between EU and Turkey open at a time when the channels of communication and the accession chapters were all frozen. That was a big success. It's something that we could do, but also involve the civil society very much into this. We've got examples from Turkey again on this. As for the role of Turkey that you've been asking, my understanding, and it's going to be very brief, of course, is that it is making an effort right now to normalize relations with neighbors. It hasn't been a very good experience so far. And at the same time, because Turkey is in really economic dire situation, it needs the funding of the European Union. I was believing all along that one way that one can discuss with Turkey is through the economic channel, because Turkey, without Europe, cannot continue to be an economy which is prosperous. And in that respect, I think there is a good kind of ground there for Turkey also to be a more constructive and stop having those kind of hostilities. They themselves understand that those hostile relations with neighbor haven't helped.
Thank you very much. Closing remark from Mr. Philis. What Greece's objectives should be moving forward?
Well, normalizing our ties with Turkey is an absolute priority for us. There's no question about that. And we welcome Turkey's return to a track of normalcy, as often underlined. Of course, curbing migration flows is another challenge for Greece in the wider periphery. We have some synergies with Egypt, Israel, Cyprus. We should build on them. And definitely, Egypt is one of the elephants in the room, the other one being Turkey. There's no question about that. And that is why Greece aims at stabilizing the situation in very turbulent times. And of course, France's contribution in that respect, because let us not forget that France is a Mediterranean country, is of crucial importance. And a last remark on my side is that there are common challenges for neighbors to tackle them together. There is a tendency, a trend towards regionalization instead of globalization. In what sense? We have more challenges in common with Turkey and other neighbors than we have, for instance, with Latvia, Lithuania, with which we are members of NATO and the EU. So we should also see how we can build and develop synergies because challenges are common between neighbors and we don't have the luxury to ignore them. For instance, let's say an initiative, a plastic-free Mediterranean or something like that, is something that does not touch upon sovereignty, sovereign rights. So we can and we should build on the fact that in such turbulent times there are issues that unite us rather than divide us.
Mr. Αβραμόπουλος, last comment. You said 10 seconds.
10 seconds and you will
I
see.
can give you 20.
You got 3. Well, first of all, let me tell you something very important. To manage migration in Europe, we need to respect 2 basic principles upon which Europe is built: solidarity and responsibility. They are not just nice words. They are stipulated 14 times in the founding texts of the treaties. So, is solidarity at stake or not? It will be proven within the next days. The second is about Turkey. I fully agree with you. This is a field where we can cooperate. We are from the same side. And this is a facilitator for the dialogue between Greece and Turkey, because here we represent the European Union. So it is good to continue on this path, and I'm happy to see that finally the decision of both governments is to cooperate on migration. So the conclusion is that it is something good. It has to be out of all these superstitions in the relations between countries.
Thank you all very much for this discussion. Thank you all for being here.